Speaking of, you were talking about compassion, meta practice. One of the challenges for many people, and one of the confounds in the neuroscience research, is this issue of in-group versus out-group. And we understand from an evolutionary level why this has occurred, but I think to survive as a species, we have to figure out ways to expand this in-group, and maybe you can comment on what your thoughts are on how we do that.
What do you mean by in-group?
The people who, you have your group that you automatically feel close to or love,
yes,
versus people you've never met, or in fact,
yes.
maybe have no opinion about, or in fact, maybe even dislike.
Yes.
How do you spread compassion, care,
yes,
love to embrace them?
Right. Yes.
And then also, especially people you may not like or have differences of opinion with, how do you embrace that? Because your response oftentimes is an emotional response.
Yes, yes, that's a very important point. The one sense of self, in our Western world, most people have predominantly a personal sense of self, derived from their life experiences and all forms of conditioning. Prior to a personal sense of self, humans apparently had a tribal sense of self. So once their sense of identity was not so much based on me, it was mainly based on us. So that began with the tribe. It's our tribe. And when the dreadful thing one could do to a person, and still perhaps is the case in some older societies, for somebody to be expelled from the tribe would be like a death sentence. Not just physically, but even psychologically, the person would virtually die. So tribal consciousness is still very much alive in humans, and this is in some societies, and in the 20th century, in certain time periods in the 20th century, was very strongly, very pronounced as nationalism, which led to the huge world wars and the madness of the 20th century. So that was really a regression to the tribal consciousness, which if you think that the egoic consciousness that's totally identified with the sense of the me, the conceptual me in the head, if you think that's mad, the thing that's more mad is the collective conscious, the collective me. So it is still the case that many people can have compassion and empathy with those who belong to their group, tribal group. And some people can only have compassion and empathy with the members of their family or extended family. They just cannot go beyond that. Anybody who is beyond the family is the stranger. So you cannot recognize another as a true human being. And you still have within countries, you have certain regions that are totally have this tribal consciousness. And then you have the tribal consciousness that surfaces in religions, very strongly still. Potentially religion is a wonderful thing, and the origin of religion, of course, is usually there was somebody who had a deep insight into the oneness of all life and attempted to teach that to others, the compassion, the love, to recognizing the other as yourself. And yet, unfortunately, mostly the beautiful original teaching got hijacked by the egoic mind and used for its own purposes. And now we have, as a result, to a large extent, although not completely, there are pockets in religion that are deeply spiritual, but in many religions are a divisive force in our world rather than something that unites us. And even within the same religion, people kill each other because it's another church or these people don't quite share our beliefs. They believe that this thing happened and we believe that thing happened 600 years ago, and they don't believe that, so they must be evil. This happens when you conceptualize other human beings in your head. First you conceptualize your tribal identity, us, and you have certain characteristics. Then you have to strengthen your tribal identity by having others who do not share that. The egoic self loves its enemies. And by the way, the personal sense of self loves its problems. So the egoic self defines itself more clearly by having the non-believers, for example, in the case of religions, the infidels, they are satanic beings out there. Or some people think the whole of America is satanic. There are probably millions of people who have the weird idea in their head, America is satanic. They've never, and if they ever met an American, they would completely, all they would see when they hear American, the screen of conceptualization, satanic, 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 and they wouldn't see you at all. They cannot differentiate between a saintly figure who is American and a brutal murderer who is American. He's just American. They can't. There should just be a street. It's incredible what the mind can do to you, how it can totally obscure your perception of reality. And sometimes some Americans may do the same towards others. It could well be that you have an idea in your head, all Muslims are awful, they're just out to kill us. And then if you truly had that idea in your head, whenever you meet someone who says, I'm a Muslim, you go, oh. You will not see the human being anymore, but only your concept. You will relate to the other through this dense screen of concept. In other words, total separation. And when you do that to another human being, then it's very easy to perpetrate acts of violence because you cannot sense their inherent aliveness anymore because you have dehumanized them. They've become, the word is objectified, because they've become mental objects. And this all happens when you are too identified with thought. It cannot step out of thought. These are the enormous dangers about being too identified with thought. So you have these collective entities which are really extremely nasty entities.
So does this get to this issue of this pain body where you need to separate that out? Because, you know, the issue is, how do you expand this group? How do you get away from that? Is it turning off this inner voice and not listening to it, putting it aside? Is that the key?
Yes, stepping out of complete identification with thinking really remains the key, so that your reality is no longer only a conceptual reality. And you can meet another human being in that sense of clear presence without imposing immediately judgments on him or her. Suddenly there is something flowing between you. Suddenly it feels good to relate to another without all those obstructions. And this is where we have to go. Otherwise we would destroy ourselves. If there is more and more humans are able to awaken now, I believe that, and I know that. There are still pockets on the planet that are very deeply possessed, one could almost say, by the tribal consciousness, and those are the places that you hear most of when you listen to the news, unfortunately.